Cool. All right. Thanks, James. Thank you guys for sticking around. This has probably been a very, very long day, so I'm going to keep it short and sweet. And after seeing what everybody else was going to talk about, I think I really focused my talk on just practical things that you can take away rather than aspirational big things and nebulous topics that are always discussed in leadership discussions. I know Corey asked the group about how many are in management, which is kind of good to see. One thing I was hoping he would ask is how many of you are first-time managers in your role? Which is a good chunk of the room. Now, how many of you felt like you were adequately trained to jump into that first-time role? Pretty much none of you, which is really, really interesting. And so, in my capacity of trying to build out EventMobi and trying to bring on the team and really trying to build a management team as we've scaled as well, it really has been a problem. And I think all of you, even though you haven't been adequately trained and still don't feel comfortable and maybe are really afraid of the role that you're in because of the consequences that it can have, you're kind of learning through osmosis and mistakes and stuff, and that's fine, but there's just some building blocks that everyone seems to miss. And I think having those foundational pieces in your management arsenal will just make your life 100 times easier. And these are things that Corey will train you on. There's a lot of different avenues of getting this, and I just thought I'd share a few of them. There's a lot of different discussions out there, but I end up seeing a lot of management discussions, be HBR articles around, what do you do in this case, or how do you fire somebody, and it's like goes on and on, rambles and rambles and rambles. It's like there's some very fundamental basic things you can do that are just easy, that'll get you to 80% of the way there before you get into the complicated stuff of the human psychology aspect of it. So that's what I'd like to really jump into. And the thing to understand as we're going through this is the most important piece that I'll say is management is a difficult career path, but also it's a different profession. Even though all of us have come into it somehow, it is not a promotion, and we shouldn't think of it as a linear progression of what we were doing. This is something totally different. It's something not just a change of tactics. It's not just you're practicing a different part of it. It's like this is totally different, and it's important to understand that because a lot of times, especially as technical people, we jump into the okay, now I'm doing 50% management, I'm doing 30%. And okay, I want to do more, I want to do less, and you kind of get stuck in that thing of well, I really like coding, and I don't know if I want to keep doing it or not, and I don't want to let it go. It's like this is not the conversation to have. If you want to get into management, jump full-heartedly into it, understand what it is, understand what you're getting yourself into as really almost as a psychologist for your team rather than anything technical, and what it actually takes to succeed in that. And once you actually really internalize that this is a career change, not a promotion, I think you'll be a lot better off in terms of understanding how to deal with it, because there is a lot of stuff that comes along with it. But in reality, as all of you have experienced, we all want to know how to do great work. We all want to know how we can be great at what we do. Unfortunately, a lot of it, regardless of whatever we do, is that. And it just takes a lot of understanding, takes time. And even as first-time managers, there's very little that anybody can tell you to do to just be a great manager. It takes time to understand it. It takes time to see and experience it. And you just have to go through it a lot over and over and over again, and it sucks. But that's kind of the way that you build good organizations, and that's the way that you learn and build on for yourself as well. The interesting thing is, for developers, and this is why I talk about it being a different almost profession, is that for developers, whenever let's say you have a really good build system, your deploy pipeline is really good, your ability to see the effect of the decisions that you're making on the system is from seconds to minutes, and hopefully not in the hours, because that's probably not a good system to deal with. But in the ideal case, in seconds you commit your code, you know exactly what your decision and that effect is. With management, the decisions that you're making can take days, weeks, months, in my case, years to see the outcome of. And to deal with that uncertainty for that period of time, this is a whole different ballgame that you have to play in. And so that's why it really takes a long time of iteration and learning and seeing and doing and experiencing to become a good manager. And in reality, to become a good manager, there's a lot of things that you have to do, right? You have to lead architecture potentially, you're dealing with your individual people growth, your resourcing and how you're going to do project management, your performance management for those individuals, cultures and values and all sorts of different things amongst many, many others. But the most important thing, and we've talked a lot about what you should do in every single case and what managers should do and this and that and different tactics, which is great. If you're a manager coming into a role, and I'm saying this as somebody who is hiring managers and bringing people on board and helping them succeed, the most important thing that you need to do is for your organization and understand what your organization specifically needs at that time to move itself forward. I, as a CTO, have things that I need to accomplish organization-wide to help us drive towards our mission. And so there's a million things that always has to be done. And I know everyone hates on leadership for all their pet projects and everything that we want to get done that is never, ever going to get done. But these are the ways that we move the organization forward. We have to have aspirations. We have to push hard. We have to make sure that we can push the organization to the next level. And to do that is impossible as executives, right? We cannot get that stuff done by ourselves. And that's where we rely on our managers to help us accomplish that and help us then deal with the people on the ground who are going to be doing the actual work. And so it's really important for you as a middle manager, especially as a tech lead, to really buy into and understand what leadership needs, why they need this, and align with the goals that they're actually setting. If you're starting out your role and you already don't buy into your leadership and you don't buy into the goals that they're setting for you, this is just a train wreck waiting to happen. And you need to either fix that and really align yourself with that, or just say, this is not my game that I want to play, and find somewhere else to kind of manage that. And this becomes that much more difficult, and I'm going to rip off some slides from Jonathan Nightingale because he did something really fantastic, which I think really shows the difficulty of management, really, because you have all these things to do, and then you add people to it, right? And so you have your team. There's all this organizational complexity of communication that people have between each other, all these people working together to make things happen. But what happens when something goes wrong and that one person is confused, they don't hear something appropriately, they miss a meeting that was crucial, they miss some sort of communication or lack some understanding? How does that affect people around them? And as you're scaling a team, and as you're growing a team, and as you're becoming a manager of a bigger and bigger team, obviously this is an extreme case, but you have all these things to keep in track of when you add people into it. And I think there's another speaker that talked about the dynamic of people and how different individually everyone is and how to keep track of all that stuff. And so how do you do all of these things really well? A lot of it comes down to transparency communication. And a lot of what management is about transparency and communication and the tactics in which we communicate the things that we need to get done or manage that the day-to-day details of what we need and how we're going to get it done as well. And so how do we do this? This is really the craft of the talk. We can do this with a few basic things of just adding some exercises into your management toolbox. So now that we've gone through that, who am I? I'm Bijan. I'm CTO at EventMobi. I've interviewed well over 1,000 candidates by now as we've grown the company. I've hired well over 150 different employees. I've scaled the company from our 2 founders to about 110 people now, and have had at some point about 30 direct reports, which is actually shouldn't really be up on the slide because that's a very, very bad thing that should never, ever be done. But just to say that I've been through that shit of managing that much and dealing with what comes with it when you actually break your own rules of understanding the 2-pizza team and then going all the way to 30 and then seeing how it all falls apart. And I think there's a former EventMobi here who probably knows what I'm talking about. Previous to that, I've worked also in a large organization like AMD, many thousands of people, and I'm part of Ace Tech, which is a group of tech CEOs of Ontario, and I'm the co-chair of their CTO roundtable. So doing a lot of different things as well. So hopefully I can give you some insight into what I've seen in a lot of different organizations that I've seen that have dealt with a lot of these issues and move forward with them. So going back to how do we actually deal with a lot of these transparency and communication issues. A lot of it is around understanding and internalizing a better communication model. And so what does that really mean? Building trust between management, yourself, and your staff to open communication paths. If your team members don't trust you, they don't believe in you, they don't understand you, it's impossible how often you set up one-on-ones, they're never going to be telling you anything that's useful to you. And building that trust is an extremely important part. Ensuring that your team feels open and comfortable in raising issues that they're seeing. I think there's been an article that's been sharing around about how Google's research about what creates high-performing teams, and they realize it's not about technical stuff, it's not about backgrounds or education, it's about psychological safety. And if your team feels safe and they feel like it's an open and comfortable place to voice their opinion, to talk, to have that open discourse, that's really when you're going to get a high-performing team. One important thing is building the culture yourself. And a lot of, I think, middle managers that are hired into the roles don't really see their role as being able to impact culture, but you really can, especially at a team level, that every issue that you hear is important and that nobody is ignored. And that if it's important to you, and this is something that has come up to you, then it's important to the company. Now, whether we're going to take action on it now or not, that's a whole different story, and that requires the explanation, discussions, and discourse. But that whatever you're bringing up, because you're an individual as part of this team, you're important, and you're important to the company, you're important to the success of this mission, and I'm going to listen to that. And building that culture is important. The other side of it is then looping back to showing how that feedback is actually being heard. It's great to say, okay, well, we sat down in a one-on-one, we had this chat, you told me about all these things you don't like. Okay, great, and then we just never hear about it again. But really helping that person see how that feedback is being heard and then what's actually being done about it, right? Even if it's nothing, but it's just so they know exactly where it's at. I think that gives people a lot of closure into, okay, I am actually and actively being heard rather than this was just a passing, fleeting thought that happened. Ultimately, your team, oh, sorry, I jumped forward one. And the other important thing is being able to immediately address and clear up gossip and confusion. Even if it's within half an hour that you came out with this clear mission, or you started the sprint and you set the goal for the sprint, and people are confused, and if you let that go for 1 day of the sprint, 2 days of the sprint, it starts, as you saw, the way that the communication model works, it'll start panning out into, it'll seep into everybody else's mind, and everybody else will start getting confused. They get conflicting messages. It has a much bigger impact. And so addressing those things up front and early is really, really important. And so ultimately, your team wants a voice and wants to be heard. So let's add some stuff into our management playbook. And these are, again, nothing revolutionary, basic things, but things that I've seen teams and organizations do wrong over and over again, even though they might have them. So hopefully I'll try to say what I feel like is a better way of doing it. It might not be the best way, but things that I've seen that has worked. So one-on-ones, SMART goals, mentorship. Super basic. I think at this point everyone's doing one-on-ones. The important part here, and I think we've almost gone to a discussion about it as well, with a few people kind of talking about it, is how do you run your one-on-ones? It is actually a really important thing. We've had people come through and be like, no, I've done one-on-ones before. We're just going to go and play ping pong, and we'll have our one-on-one doing ping pong. And okay, we'll just go for a walk and get our coffee, and that's fine, and that's a way of doing a one-on-one, and that could be your way of building rapport when you're coming into a team. But what are you actually talking? What is the craft of the one-on-one is actually really, really important. And how much time do you give them? So managing your weekly, bi-weekly one-on-ones, at least 30 minutes to an hour. Again, you have to find out who is your team, what do they need from you, and what time makes sense. If they're busy and stressed and crazy all the time, don't bother them too much. Keep it short and sweet. Get to the craft of the conversation very quickly. Help them out. Help them unblock it. When they have the time, things change a month or two down the road. Okay, let's take a full hour. Let's do it more often. Let's figure out kind of what the next thing is. You have to be a little bit more flexible about it rather than a strict set of rules to play with. The important part is I've seen all sorts of different people that I've had one-on-ones with, right? There's people who will talk, and they want to talk about everything under the sun, which is great, and you kind of try to get through whatever they can. There's people that I've had who see me as the boss and will just not say anything to me. Or, especially new junior employees that come on, we have a one-on-one, within about 30 seconds, it's just like crickets and silence of, okay, well, what do you want to talk about? Nothing. Okay, well, what's on your mind? How's the project going? Good. Okay, well, what can I do to help you? Nothing. Okay, so that conversation ended, and it's like, okay, well, what happens with the next half an hour? And this is where I've seen a lot of people just be like, okay, well, I guess the one-on-one's done. We're going to leave the room now and get on with our day. And I think this is really where the opportunity for mentorship and teaching come in. And I've seen this with great results is you as a manager have gotten to your role because you have certain specific tidbits of knowledge, you have experience, you have some understanding to give to that individual, which is why you're their manager, hopefully, and take that time to just talk. It doesn't have to be about any certain topic. Just be like, hey, today I want to talk about why we do Agile in the way that we do, or why this is important, or how I've seen these projects kind of fall off the rails, and this is why maybe the mission that's coming down the pipe is set up in this way, or maybe it's the architecture, maybe the plugins that we're using are these specific plugins. Just take the time and just talk to the individual. And you will be surprised at how much use people get from these impromptu kind of mentorship sessions, which actually isn't really impromptu. It's kind of being really set up for that. And where SMART goals come in, and I'll talk about SMART goals, is really a way to structure that more. If you're having a little bit of difficulty in finding out what should we talk about, or maybe you've been having a one-on-one with this person for a year or 2 years, and you're like, okay, we've kind of run out of topics to kind of talk about. I've given them everything that's in my head. I think they kind of get it, but what do we kind of move on from here? Is really where you start using the whole notion of SMART goals. And this is, to Corey's point, and I think they did it really well at PagerDuty as well, was is an important piece of what you talk about in your one-on-ones, because if you do this really well, and this gets, not the base level of management playbooks, but you start building up into something really, really efficient, as you start using these goals as a way of doing performance management. Right? Your one-on-ones and what you capture in your one-on-ones become your annual review. You just go sit down and you review everything that you talked about in your one-on-ones. You're like, okay, this happened, you had a bad week, then you recovered from it, and then, oh, no, wait, you've been having 6 months of like just bad weeks. This just hasn't gotten any better. You know what, your performance is really sliding. These are really good conversations to have rather than, the one conversation annually that happens. And so a good way of actually setting that so you have good content and things that you actually document and write down and reflect on is setting SMART goals. And the whole idea of SMART goals is these two sections. You have the overall goal, which are the goal itself is specific and it's achievable, so it's not crazy, and it's something very attainable. And within that are actions that individual will do around that goal that will be reviewed through the one-on-ones. So those actions should be measurable, they should be relevant to their work that they're doing at any given time, and it should be time-bound. So it's not just, well, we're going to do this thing, and I don't really know when and whatever's going to happen. What does this look like in real life? This is an example of a SMART goal, right? So the individual comes in through a one-on-one, you kind of have your discussion about it, and you're like, all right, well, what can I do to help you? This sort of thing. Their code maybe isn't so good. The way they've architected the last project hasn't been so good. Okay, that person wants to learn design patterns to be able to identify where there are occurrences, make appropriate use in their design, apply in their code, provide feedback of details in code review, and present in depth to an audience. That's a great goal to have. It's, again, going back, it is it showing up? Whoops. Oh, sorry. Animations. That goal was specific, and reading through it, even though it was verbose, it's achievable, right? There's nothing kind of crazy about that goal. The parts about it being measurable, time-bound, and relevant, read the design patterns book by this time date, identify the usages where design patterns could have been used for design of software or done poorly. Again, this is great for having a one-on-one discussion and coming back and, okay, what did you see this week that used a design pattern? Why was it good? Why was it bad? Would you have used something different? This is a good discussion to have during a one-on-one, especially as something more technical focused. Okay, there are other pieces. Apply at least one design pattern in creating a software design, and applying it in writing by November 15th. present this design pattern in a lunch and learn or something as examples, et cetera. And these are really good things to put through in a one-on-one and actually measure and reflect on over time and see how that person has progressed and how their growth is progressing over time. So that's one easy example, but something that I see people squander that opportunity for one-on-one very, very often. This is a really good opportunity to get some really good discussions and really help that individual grow over time. Next up is really about performance management and growth. This is one thing as well that is very nebulous, and so how, when you talk about performance management, especially to your team, most of the time they have no idea what that means. It means, okay, at some point somebody's going to come to me and tell me that I got a raise or I'm not going to get a raise, or worse yet, I'm going to get fired in the next 2 weeks or whatever that it is, and it's just not a good mindset to be in. Again, for that psychological safety, you really want to help your team understand how decision-making is done and how is performance assessed. Make it very, very clear to them in terms of how are they actually being critiqued and evaluated to help them understand what it takes to get to that next level. One way that I've done this really well, and again, this goes back into our one-on-one conversations, and sorry if that's not so clear, I'll kind of try to run through it, is these are our different levels on the left-hand column of engineer growth. This is our career ladder growth, essentially. I know these don't necessarily have to be your titles on LinkedIn or whatever that you put out, but internally, this is how we refer to our team in terms of seniority, right? You're a software eng 1, 2, you're a senior software eng 2, staff, senior staff, principal engineer, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's variations of this once you get into management or other avenues as well if you'd like to. And so this branches off to show people, you can actually become super senior, get a high salary, whatever you're looking for as an individual contributor. But there are these other avenues, management, where you can jump into, and it is a different profession to actually walk down. But what does it actually mean to be at these levels? And so we've set up 4 different columns there. You'll see technical depth, technical breadth, the impact of their work, and their communication leadership. Is the ways that I choose to lead my teams and the things that I think is important. And then we write down very specific examples of what does it mean to show technical depth at a senior software eng 2 level. And that specificity is actually really, really important. And this becomes, again, as a way of goal setting, as a way of helping your team grow, really, really important as, okay, I want to get this salary. I don't think I'm paid well enough here. And then, okay, that's fine. We can pay you that much, but it requires you to be at that level. If you can show that, I'm more than happy to go fight for you for that raise that you're looking for, right? So what does it mean to be at that level? Okay, you have to show this. How do you show this? Well, the next project that comes up, why don't you try X, Y, Z, right? And start setting those goals for them to help them actually move and kind of grow into that. This makes it super, super clear in terms of what that person's growth path looks like and what they should be doing to get to that next level. And a lot of these things become, it might take a year for you to grow into that level, but that's okay. Let's start working on it now, right? This isn't meant to be as like every one-on-one we come into it. Okay, you jump another level. Okay, you jump another level. It's like, this is really long-term, short-term goal setting through this as an avenue of communication. And again, this helps alleviate that transparency and helps make it a lot easier for people to understand what's actually happening behind the scenes, especially for management. So that's great. Now we've gone the hard skills out of the way. How do we deal with this in terms of the soft skills, right? Everyone knows the no jerk rule. You never want jerks on your team. It's just bad for business. But how do you actually have discussions about it? What if you see somebody trending in that direction? How do you document what you're actually feeling, and against what values do you actually manage that? And how do you actually document the cultural aspects that are just as important as the hard skills in the work they're actually doing? Again, this is an example of something that I run through with my team. I might have my whole team list there. This is, personally for me, I don't share this with anybody else, but it is a way for me to document on my own how I'm thinking at any given time about the cultural alignment for that individual within our team, and that's something that I can open up for discussions. Because a lot of times things happen in your day-to-day. You just, somebody just says something out of hand, or in a retrospective, something kind of goes awry, and you're not really sure. This is a good way for me to document it and come back to later on and be like, hey, this is something specific that actually happened that we need to address and move on. So you'll see there's 5 different things there: passion and drive, empathy and kindness, transparency, teamwork, And then autonomy and accountability. These are things that I didn't come up with myself. We actually did a whole group exercise with the whole team. We sat down and said, what does a high-performing team look like? What team would you want to work on, if you could? And this will change over time, right? You bring different individuals in, this will change, and different characteristics will become more important over time. That's okay. But for that time period, these were the most important characteristics that they said that a high-performing team would have. And I said, great, okay, this is what you guys came up with. And then let's talk about who is or is not aligning to these things so we know how cohesive we are being as a team. And so it's kind of a quick, this person is, if you look at the first row, they are being passionate and driven. They're like so-so and empathy and kindness, et cetera, et cetera. And then you can really start to see somebody that might have the hard skills, but is really failing in terms of the soft skills. And sometimes that becomes the hardest management decisions because you don't want to let that person go. They're doing their job, they're getting the sprint done, but they're having a huge impact on your team that you're just letting it slip and letting it go. This makes it super, super clear in terms of how that's happening. The other parts that are really useful are the next kind of 4 columns there is the decision-making capability that person has, the communication ability, and what is their structure in terms of who are they influencing within that graph that we kind of looked at initially. What is their capacity? Are they just heads on fire all the time? So do they actually have some leeway to kind of take on more? And what is their internal motivation? Right? And again, documenting these pieces for every individual on your team is super, super important because it helps you understand. You're going to run into a problem. Leadership comes down to you and says, we need to tackle this thing. Okay, well, I can't do it. I need to kind of move this on to somebody else. This really helps you understand, okay, well, if I give this to this person, who do they have influence over? Can they actually make this happen? Do they have the capacity to make it happen? Are they going to be internally motivated by this or not? And it's easy to say, okay, well, I know my team, and yeah, okay, I know who it's going to go to, but a lot of times we can just make gut decisions, and it's not always the right gut decision. This really helps you kind of internalize and document it a lot better. Again, helping with the transparency and that communication side of it as well. One other piece that we've talked about a lot is kind of doing retrospectives of that. This is kind of our version of retro of retros. Early on that we used to do was with the whole team just say, let's get all the sprint teams together. What should we do less of? What should we do more of? What should we continue doing? Super simple. Each person has to write one thing on each category, essentially. So just write whatever you want, but make sure you write one thing at least on each one of these categories. Then we go and bunch them up, talk about it in person, and kind of work through it. That was good. It worked for a while until the team kind of got a little too big, kind of broke down. Communication side of it broke down. People weren't so comfortable going up to some of their peers they did know or didn't know. A lot of the social constructs kind of came in and kind of prevented our way of kind of moving this forward. What we ended up doing as we scaled was move into a little bit more of a distributed model. What we call this is the Engineering Management Task Force Board. So the managers or tech leads essentially have one-on-ones with their team. They surface up anything that comes out of those discussions. They immediately put it into that to discuss pile, right? This is an open board available to everybody on the team. So as soon as anything comes up, regardless of if it's going to be actioned on or not, regardless if it's stupid or useful or whatever that is, it goes on the to discuss board. The task force, essentially, which is the engineering managers, get together, and this is really what our standing agenda is. New hires, review the to discuss, review items and doing, et cetera. And this becomes a super transparent way to actually show your team what are you doing with the feedback that you're getting, right? Oh, we add in comments. Okay, we're not going to take action on this because X, Y, Z, or we don't have time, we don't have the resources, or we've blown through our change management budget, or whatever that it is. This is not going to happen. Or okay, this is a really good idea. We'll put it in, the backlog, and this is how we're prioritizing the backlog. So then now people know, okay, I gave them this idea, or I said this thing sucked, and I vented, or whatever that it is, and hey, this is actually doing something, right? And this relieves your team of a lot of pressure. It's a really, really important piece of it as well. And so when we do demo days for our team and every team goes up and shows it, I usually wrap up by saying, hey, this is what management's doing. This is what progress we've made in terms of the things that we've talked about. This is what our doing pile looks like. And then we have our done pile that everyone can see. It's like, hey, we have made a lot of changes and good things have come out of it, which is really, really useful. So those are a few examples. If I had a longer talk, I could go into a whole bunch of other things. But I think these are really fundamental pieces that we all kind of just skip on, or we don't really take too seriously, or we don't really understand them well enough to kind of jump into. But it can really help your team move forward in a really, really good way. The important thing is, why do you ultimately want to do these things? There's the transparency and communication side. But the most important thing you can do as a manager is to remove any sort, and especially for knowledge workers, remove any sort of friction of them thinking about anything else other than their work, right? If they don't have to think about, what's happening on Friday with this team meeting, or, why did this person invite me to this, or, what's going to happen in my review meeting in, a month and a half, and whatever. Just remove those things from their head, let them get to work, let them do the stuff that they're amazing at. That's really how you get performance out of people. And what does performance actually really mean? This is a whole other talk, but just to kind of go through it, I think performance really can be measured through creativity, productivity, commitment, and collegiality. And the stuff that I talked about and some of those building blocks can really help you address any one of these things, right? If you help them unblock their thoughts about, how is my performance being reviewed, their creativity goes up. They're not so stressed about what's going on in their day-to-day, right? Their productivity can go up. You can address these things. And these are really, really important aspects of it, which unfortunately I don't have time to go to, but I'd love to do in a follow-up talk at some point. But anyways, that hopefully gives you a basis of understanding of why these sort of exercises are important, why they need to evolve over time as you have different individuals on your team, and how you can use them to actually build a higher performing team. So thank you.